Welcome, everyone, to Healthcare Leadership Live. My name is Mike Lyons, and we're here once again to talk about ways that you can be a better healthcare leader. And specifically, today we're talking about the eye care industry, one of my favorite topics. And my guest here is Erich Mattei. And Erich is a pro when it comes to starting up and revving up eye care businesses. And he's an expert at that. So welcome, Erich, to the show.
Mike, thank you so much for having me on. I'm very much looking forward to this topic we're going to explore today.
Yeah, well, you have an expertise that I certainly don't have. And, one of the reasons I like to do this show is because I get to talk to awesome people like you who really know about things that I have no idea about. And so believe me, every question I have is going to come from a place of genuine curiosity. So I can't wait to tap into your knowledge. But with that, tell us or tell me really, what is it that you do? How do you help your clients, and why do you do this work?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so Mike, I am the president and chief vision officer of Acrinos, which is a business consultancy that specializes in working with optometrists and ophthalmologists at all phases of that business life cycle. And, what we're all about is about creating an environment and creating an approach to consulting and providing the business tools to empower private practitioners to really thrive in business ownership. Mike, as consumers of healthcare, we're all consumers of healthcare. We see a lot of the changes that have happened here in the healthcare marketplace, really, no matter what we're talking about, whether we're talking about vision and eye care, which is our area of expertise in Acrinos, or any other area of healthcare. The fact is, there's a radically growing public health need for the care that doctors are capable of providing. And when you start to look at some of the consumer research, you come to realize exactly to what degree many patients prefer patronizing independence. They prefer patronizing private practices. So what we're all about here in Acrinos is really simple, right? I mean, we provide consulting and advisory to empower eye care providers to start, grow, and transition a thriving business. And here we are in year 5, and it's amazing, empowering doctors across North America to make it happen in their practices, serving their patients on their terms.
I love that, and that incredibly aligns with the work I do as well. And it's so gratifying to be able to help providers, doctors, optometrists, to create business on their terms, exactly as you said. And many people think and they feel that it, as you said, it's for the betterment of patient care.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mike, I came into the eye care space working with a global leader in eye care. I came to the industry in 2010, and it was through those formative years of being around the industry that I really got to see all these happenings from the inside out, right? And see firsthand the differences between the practices that are really making it happen as profitable businesses with loyal, established patients compared to those that struggle to achieve some of those milestones. So it's very much informed a lot of the work we do here at Acrinos.
Well, so what we're going to do here in this conversation is Erich and I kind of strategize a little bit. So there's a couple different ways that a eye care practitioner can go about starting their own business. One is what you call the cold start. So starting from scratch. And the other way is acquiring or buying a business. And so what we're going to do in this conversation is we're going to spend some time talking about the cold start approach. And then we're going to spend some time diving into the acquisition or the purchase approach. And they're very different. I'm looking forward to really understanding from Erich, how different they are. And man, I'm stoked about that. So this will probably end up being a 2-part audio show, but it's going to be a 1-part live show. So by the way, if you are here live, if you're listening on LinkedIn or YouTube and you have a question for Erich, you have a golden opportunity to tap into his knowledge right now. Maybe you're an optometrist out there, you're thinking about starting a practice, or maybe you're even a student of optometry, or maybe you're with a group and you want to bust out on your own. Erich is the guy. This is your opportunity. So put a comment into the LinkedIn, and we'll see that, and we can discuss it on the air here, or if you have a question. And so, yeah, absolutely take advantage of that. So with that, yeah, let's talk about the cold start of the practice. I like to think about, fit. In HR, we think about fitting the right person to the right job. Well, is the cold start for everyone when it comes to eye care?
Oh, Mike, starting with the big questions. And
Right.
I'm glad you serve it up. I'm glad you serve it up in that regard, because I think it's really important to let our starting point actually be, look, y'all, you're a doctor. You've worked very hard to get where you are. You've established the training. You've achieved the certifications and credentials to provide the care that you seek to provide to your patients in your community. So all of that being said, practice ownership is just one modality within which to practice. So, so that being said, I do always like to start this conversation, Mike, with realizing, like, look, there's no judgment here. We're not saying that one modality is superior to the other, or this or that or the other, but rather what it really all ties back to is this. What is the modality that's most in line with your vision as a provider of care? That's really what this is all about. Now, this is where I'll invite folks, because we could, Mike, we could devote an entire hour just to talking about the reasons why folks would want to pursue practice ownership or any path of entrepreneurship, right? But that being said, I think the most important, really, really ground rules are to tie this back to your professional mission, vision, and purpose. Now, sometimes these terms are kind of used interchangeably, but they actually do have their own unique definitions. So think of this. Think of your mission as being what you do and for whom. Think about your vision being kind of this future state that you would like to see yourself creating for those that you're there to serve. And then third is the purpose. Well, just that. What is the purpose for jumping into practice? So it's oftentimes in just kind of, exploring some of these reflections around what your professional mission, vision, and purpose is. That's going to be kind of one of these first steps to determine if practice ownership is right for you. Because as we always like to remind everyone, this journey into entrepreneurship truly has to be centered on your mission, vision, purpose. It should not be centered on the fact that you don't like the place you're working in now. Mm-hmm. It should not be contingent on the fact that you simply want to go out and make a ton of money any means possible. Really, you want to tie this stuff back to your mission, vision, purpose, because that truly is the core calling that is going to do a couple of things. One, it's going to ensure that when you're actually creating this business, and we'll get into all the details here shortly, but it's going to ensure that when you're creating the business, you're creating it in such a way that it really reflects the scope of care and services you're truly seeking to provide, right? But number two, when the going gets tough, because by all means, in entrepreneurship, in private practice, the going will get tough. But the degree to which you're connected with that mission, vision, purpose, and you have your business anchored to that mission, vision, purpose, that's what's going to see you through those good times and bad and achieving some amazing things. And look, you don't have to take my word for it, right? I mean, lean into your colleagues out there that maybe have been in practice ownership for a number of years and perhaps have experienced some economic turbulence along the lines of some of which we're experiencing right now as we're recording this, right? Or any myriad of variables that may be tossed out there. So again, we want to start with tying this all back to your mission, vision, purpose, and seeing if this practice ownership is right for you.
This show is sponsored by Seasoned Advice HR Services, where I help clinical healthcare businesses to make more money and save more money by hiring better, retaining better, and reducing your HR risk. If you would like an HR assessment or ongoing HR support, please reach out to me at seasoned-advice.com.
That's huge. I mean, you gotta check in with yourself, right? One of the things I like to do every day with my business is remind myself, why am I doing this? And I try to do that every day. Why the heck am I doing this thing? And
Absolutely.
I love that what you just said there. Um, is there is there anyone that you think, maybe that starting from scratch, where that person should maybe have a second thought about whether, maybe I don't want to start from scratch.
That's a fascinating question, Mike, because when we look at what's occurring right now in healthcare, as a matter of fact, there's some really good research that was published by Jobson, Review of Optometric Business, not long ago, that looked at um, how many doctors in ownership are looking to retire in the next 5-10 years. And Mike, the numbers are absolutely staggering when we see how many doctors that are in ownership are looking to exit practice in the coming years. Now, what this is creating is a marvelous opportunity for entrepreneurial doctors, because now, remember, you want to start with your mission, vision, purpose. So truly, if you are considering practice ownership, do some reflections on that. We've got some really great content we've pushed out there. I know Mike has some really great content they're getting out there as well. But reflecting on your mission, vision, purpose for practice ownership, but realizing that now, as we're seeing so many doctors that are in ownership that are looking to transition, now there's this golden opportunity, because cold starting no longer has to be the only path to ownership. As a matter of fact, Mike, what we increasingly find is that doctors reach out to Acrinos from markets across North America looking to cold start. And I tell you, rarely is there the situation where someone's looking to cold start and there's not also a practice that's potentially on sale, if not already on the market, there in their market. So when you kind of tie it back here, we recognize that for the emerging practice owner looking to get into practice ownership now, there are more opportunities available to them, because not only do we have this prospect of cold start, but we also have all of these legacy businesses that are going to be looking to transition in the very near future.
That sounds like it would be very enticing for the person out there starting a business. And honestly, as a complete novice, my thought would be the cold start would be so much more difficult. I assume there's real estate and equipment and stuff. And so is that a fallacy, or is that really true that the cold start it will take you more time and more money and more difficulty?
Well, that's Mike, truly, all of this stuff depends on the facts of that individual situation. And what do I mean by the facts of that individual situation? Well, look, let's simply start with the fact that nearly 90% of patients reside within about a 3-mile radius of their eye doctor. I mean, really think about that. It's fascinating. So that in itself, just looking at kind of the addressable market that a practice will have, now we can see, wow, oh my goodness, yeah, there really are going to be some intricacies that are highly individualized to that unique situation. But that's just scratching the tip of the iceberg. I've actually written and spoken about this at length. So please, to our listeners out there, feel free to go. If you go find me on LinkedIn, you can find some access to some of the articles I've written exploring this. But consider that, and this question you posed, Mike, is really all about the startup costs and the expense of opening a practice. Not to get into the full kind of comparison of cold starting versus purchasing, but in a nutshell, you can expect that over its lifespan, a cold start, while it's going to be a little bit more daunting to get up and running, over its lifespan, the cold start is what's going to provide the highest ROI to that entrepreneur. And you need to put this in context of the fact that when you're buying a business, sure, you're buying cash flow, but you're also paying, and oftentimes paying handsomely for that cash flow. Furthermore, at times, it can be challenging to get that established business on a growth trajectory, the likes of which the new practice owner would really want to get into doing, right? And that can be impacted by any myriad of things, such as market, the consumers and patients and demographics and purchasing behavior of consumers in that market. If we're working with managed care, we can think of that world of credentialing and panels. Are they open? Are they closed? What type of accessibility will I have to serving those patients? And again, that's just barely starting to touch on a few things at the top of that list of how we look to take that established practice and get it on the growth trajectory. So all of that to say, and this is really the takeaway message for our viewers out there, is if you're cut out for practice ownership, and in your professional mission, vision, purpose, practice ownership is right for you, then whether cold starting or purchasing right now, there is a world of opportunity. When we look at the growing public health need for vision, medical, and specialty eye care, we look at the expanding scope of care, the expanding scope of optometry and serving care, in providing care, these new fascinating ways that optometrists and ophthalmologists are able to come together to serve the entirety of that patient journey. Again, there's a wealth of opportunity in practice ownership.
Okay, that's interesting. So yeah, the ROI potential, it sounds like, is higher. So yeah, you had me kind of thinking there, well, why wouldn't you want to capitalize on all these new business opportunities? But the cold start has that upside. So that's a fascinating angle. But the downside maybe of that is a little bit more time, maybe more of a process to get going.
Yep, but no skeletons in the closet, I'll tell you that much.
That's good. I know in HR, we know sometimes those skeletons are there, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Fascinating. Okay. Well, so yeah, that was kind of into my next question there, is about risk, right? And so you mentioned one of the risks of the acquisition, but what about risk when it comes to the cold start? So maybe you don't have the skeletons in the closet, or that employment lawsuit that no one wanted to talk about or whatever. But what are some of the big risks in the cold start path?
Oh my goodness, Mike. In cold starting a practice, you are exposed to risk truly around every corner, right? And that being said, let's look at this through the lens of not only risk posed to a cold start, but risk posed to any business, even to our listeners out there that are maybe just in practice ownership and wondering about what their next move in private practice is going to be. But we consider we're exposed to risk all over the place. We're exposed to liquidity risk, right? So think of just simply the risk of, hey, do we have money sufficiently coming in the door to be able to pay the bills? Now, obviously, depending on where the business is in this practice life cycle, there are going to be different fixes that may need to be brought into place to account for that risk, right? For instance, do we need to get credentialing to mitigate an RCM risk, or do we need to invest in our billing practices so as to mitigate this RCM risk, right? So we look at liquidity and the ability just to meet our short-term debts. We can look at operational risk and simply look at the risk of this business to continue operating and generating the revenue, the cash flow that it currently generates. I believe another really big risk is just simply the market risk, Mike. And this is something that is really fascinating to see. And every now and again, I'll get into some of the online communities, although I don't do it as much anymore. But it's at times kind of scary to see how folks will talk about what happens in different markets. And what's scary to me is how you can see someone in this market over here posing a question to a community, And then you've got someone in a totally unrelated market with perhaps totally different demographics that are providing a commentary and realizing that these things that they're so dissimilar that what works over here perhaps may actually be a graver risk to try to deploy over here, right? So all of this to say, when we're talking about risk, and really when you think about it, Mike, you know, the work that we do within Acrinos, just as the work that you do within Seasoned Advice, right? It's all about mitigating risk for these practices. In your realm, it's HR and the whole world of HR, compliance, people development, right? In our world, we look at this risk in addressing some of those key risks that I just touched on. And specifically, there's 3 key areas that you'll want to drill down on. And look, to our listeners out there, this is a bunch of really great seasoned free advice. But y'all, this is also, in working with a team like Acrinos, these are the things that we have created, we're experts in. And it's all about mitigating that risk around 3 key areas, okay? The first of these has to do with that market. I say the first in no particular order, okay? The first of these has to do with the market. So do you remember earlier in our conversation, we were talking about developing that mission, vision, purpose. So now it's a matter of mitigating the risk of that mission, vision, purpose becoming a profitable business in this market. As we just touched on, we know that the vast majority of patients reside within a very tight geographical radius of the practice. So step number 1 in mitigating risk is what? Let's do some market research. Let's dig in, understand the competitive market, understand the demographics and broader socioeconomic trends that are occurring across the consumers, and let that inform some of our paths forward. So again, number 1 is this risk of, we'll say, market fit. So what's the fix for that? What do? We dig into doing competitive and geospatial market analysis. Number 2 gets into elements of the financial risk. And obviously here, this is where, depending on if we're working with a cold starter, someone purchasing a practice, namely whether we're constructing a financial forecast feasibility analysis or constructing a valuation on an established business, obviously in each of these exercises, each of these processes are done to determine and mitigate the financial risk. In the context of constructing the financial forecast and feasibility analysis for your cold start, you're going to want to ensure that that is going to quantify all of the startup costs. So that will include the real estate, the build out of the real estate, all of the equipment that will be put into the space, obviously furnishings, tenant improvements, your operations, your technology and software. Think of all of that stuff. So all of that's what's captured in that financial forecast and feasibility analysis for our cold start. Now, obviously, if you're looking to purchase a practice, then you would start with constructing a valuation of that established business you're looking to purchase. That's going to gauge the risk, and actually it's going to assign a price to that business as is based on the risk. But then even for one purchasing a practice, take the next step to develop your own financial forecast and feasibility analysis to gauge what the business will look like into the future, right? Because it's not until you've kind of forecasted revenues that we can then forecast revenues, or only half the story. We also need the expenses, right? So that's why we want to do these exercises, to forecast the revenues, but also forecast the expenses, because then and only then can you have a solid quantification of the cash flow. And now we're going to know, is it worth taking on the debt to start this business? Is it worth taking on the debt to buy this business, in all of the things, right? So again, we're getting back to talking about risk, and we're talking about market fit. So how do we assess and position ourselves to strategically approach the risk of market fit? Geospatial competitive market analysis. Next up, the financial risk. How do we gauge that? If we're buying a business, we want to do a valuation. And then whether we're buying a business or cold starting a business, we definitely want to construct our own forward-facing financial forecast and feasibility analysis. That's going to include our revenue projections and our expense projections, because then we can project our cash flows. So we've now gauged the risk. You're going to go borrow $500,000, $700,000, whatever the case may be, to cold start or buy a practice. Let's understand the risk, the future of us being able to repay that loan, right? So those are some of the key risks that anyone is going to face, right? And then we can start jumping into some of these other areas of risk, right? Solvency. We look at volatility and business risk, and now we're getting into some other areas regarding. There's some other areas of the business that need to be developed specifically with marketing and people. And this doesn't even get into the world of HR, right? But nonetheless, while there are a lot of risks when cold starting or buying a business, with the right steps, assessing and analyzing the right data, and then constructing the appropriate forecasts, that's when you start seeing some of the facts. Now, they are projections, but nonetheless, we can start to quantify this stuff. And now what was the risk that maybe to our listeners out there have been thinking about doing this for a few years and you're afraid? It's absolutely okay to be afraid. As a matter of fact, you should be afraid. So you don't get yourself in trouble. You should be afraid. But notice that the fear level, Mike, is going to start to come down. The more of those things we get answers to, now those fears start kind of melting away.
This ties into where I was going mentally there, which is, the financial risk. If you are trying to secure funding, really my next question is about how to secure funding. Let's say I'm a student, or maybe I've been an employed optometrist for a little while. I don't have 700 grand laying around, right? And so how do you take this kernel of an idea? Maybe I have the mission, the vision, the values, and I feel like, man, I'm called to do this. I really want to make this my next move, but I don't know where to get the funds from. How do you do that?
Yeah, great question. And to our listeners out there, I apologize in advance if I'm taking cold start and purchase and kind of marrying them together in the responses here. But, and Mike, we were chatting about this a little bit also prior to going live. There is a lot of overlap. Yeah. There is a lot of overlap here. Now, mind you, there are definitely things that are unique to each path, and we will elaborate on those. But let's get back to this whole topic of finance, okay? So you're going to go to a bank to borrow this money. Hey, if you've got a lot of money and cash sitting on the sideline that you're wanting to throw at this, good for you. But by the way, also, even though you do have a lot of cash sitting on the sideline, it's not necessarily the best use of those funds to throw them all into startup, right? But nonetheless, in securing funds, it's all about telling the story. Now, as you're listening to this and you yourself are maybe a little bit afraid of your next step, looking to cold start or purchase a business, trust that you're actually not the one that's most exposed. The one that's most exposed is going to be the financiers of this. So presumably a commercial lender, right? Or government if it's SBA, right? But presumably a commercial lender. So what they are going to be looking for is they want to understand what is the feasibility of you succeeding. And I always like sharing this and kind of elaborating on this, because there is something to be said for getting approval. Understand, when the bank says, yes, doctor, we will approve you for this amount of funds, that's them saying, we believe in you. That's not Eric saying he believes in you. That's not Mike saying he believes in you. That's not your patient saying, hey, please go start your own place because we believe in you. We want to go see you in your own office. No, that's a lending institution saying, hey, Like, we have a lot of data that we look at, and we believe, based on all the data that we look at and the data that you have shared with us, the bank, we are going to provide you with these funds. Now, what is the data that you want to share for the bank? It's as follows. If you're looking to cold start a practice, you need to have a well-constructed strategic business plan that includes all the things. So what are all the things? It includes a full 3 to 5 year financial forecast and feasibility analysis on your venture. That's going to include all of your startup costs. And I touched on these a little bit earlier also, right? All your startup costs, including your real estate, build out of the real estate, working with professionals along the journey, consultants, attorneys, accountants, all of the equipment and infrastructure that will be going into the business, your HR and people costs, right, Mike, your world, everything that goes into getting this business off the ground. Now, it's also important, I say important, it is absolutely vital that 3-year financial forecast and feasibility analysis has realistic and conservative projections of future cash flows. Mike, I can't tell you how important it is for doctors to be realistic in constructing these. And hey, if you don't know what you're doing in constructing this, work with professionals like our team at Acrinos, because it is so vitally important that the right data, the right numbers are being pulled into that financial forecast and feasibility analysis. So in constructing this strategic business plan, it's going to consist of the financial forecast and feasibility analysis. It's going to consist of a competitive and market geospatial analysis. So again, I've referenced this a little bit earlier in our conversation as well. And what you want this to look at is not just your list of competitors in the market and basic socioeconomics, like, average household income and average property value. Look, that information is good, but y'all, the real data that you want to get into is where you can actually look at healthcare spend in that market, when you can look at eye care and eyewear spend in that market, when you can look at other behaviors of residents of that community that would be indicative of their need for vision, medical, especially eye care. For example, active lifestyle. We know the correlation between active lifestyle and contact lens use. And we know the correlation between active lifestyle and LASIK procedures. So again, if you'll follow where I'm going with this, you look at the data that is going to kind of shine a light on services that we'll be providing in the practice.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike, please.
I was just going to say, there are amazing tools out there. I've seen it in the retail world that can help you tap into this kind of information, and it really is amazing.
Absolutely, through and through. And hey, side note regarding geospatials, when we do these geospatials, we do them across 9 zip codes surrounding that location of interest. So there's some fascinating drill downs that we can get into that also can lend itself to some broader marketing and geofencing. Another topic for another conversation, Mike. But getting back to it, so we're talking about how we secure the financing, right? And remember, this is all about how we are telling the story, documenting and quantifying the story of the business. So we start with that financial forecast feasibility analysis. Then we get into that geospatial and competitive market analysis. And then we pull it all together with the business plan. And this is where you, as the entrepreneur, are going to tell your story, your mission, vision, purpose. You're going to share with your vision of how operations will be managed. You'll discuss your team, your org chart, this whole world of HR, right? What that is going to look like. You'll establish some goals and milestones, 3, 5, 10-year benchmarks. You'll get into talking about even what the exit strategy may potentially look like. So again, the ability for you to acquire the financing you will need to make this happen is going to be contingent on your ability to tell that story. Now, If we're looking to purchase a practice, Mike, and we're going to go secure financing there, then I would like you to consider everything we just went down, the business plan, but add to that also a valuation. As a matter of fact, it will be the conclusion of value determined in that valuation that is actually going to serve as the startup cost in that financial forecast and feasibility analysis of the business plan. Consider the bank's approach to loaning funds to purchase a practice. The bank is loaning funds to purchase a practice based on an expectation that that business is going to continue to grow and thrive and be profitable into the future. That said, the bank does not want to see the business just kind of putter along as is. They might still give you the money, but that's not really what they're looking for. They want to see a plan of how you are going to take this established business of the last 20, 25, 30 years and how you are going to take those dollars that they are going to loan you and how you're going to turn that into something bigger than what you're borrowing from them. Because banks do not want to lend money for people just to like take it from their right pocket, put it in their left pocket and give it back to the bank. That ain't what this is about. This is about having a strategic plan to grow the value of the asset. And in so doing, everyone wins. So just brief little recap here. We're talking about securing financing. It's all about writing a solid business plan. By the way, a solid business plan is so much more than what some agentic AI will spit back to you. You really got to hyper localize this stuff and individualize this stuff to you and your local market, right? Furthermore, if this is going to include purchasing a business, to have a solid valuation on that business that is being constructed with proven methodologies that are accepted standards of value in 2025, that is absolutely imperative. That's another thing too. So another conversation for another time. What valuations look like when doctors create their own valuations on their businesses. Don't get me started. Call your banks too. Call some of your banking friends and ask them about the differences between solid business plans and solid valuations versus slop, whether it's AI slop or valuation slop that just is totally off base.
Well, I can totally see where that could take people off course and where it would be good to have a partner through that process. My thought here now is I'd love for you to share, if you could share with the folks listening, how could people get in touch with you if they want to understand, more how you could help them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, y'all head on over to akrinos.com. It's at akrinos.com. Check it out. You'll get an opportunity there to learn a little bit more on some of these topics that I've been touching on. You'll learn a little bit more about exactly what that journey to ownership will look like. Also there, you can fill out a little contact us form. We can hop on a call. You're also welcome to reach out on LinkedIn. I've been known to poke around old LinkedIn here and there, but feel free to reach out, connect with me, shoot me a DM. Would love to hop on a discovery call, learn about your situation and answer some questions you may have and help provide some guidance on where to go from there.
Cool. Well, and I'm going to put links into the show notes for anyone who is listening to the recorded version of this show. I'm going to put links into the show notes. I also want to say, if you are watching live, Eric's here. He's ready to answer questions. If you want to say hi, drop a comment. We'd love to see a comment come through. But now I'd like to transition into some of the questions that are more specific to the buy acquire scenario.
Sure.
And we've kind of been weaving things in, and really that's kind of necessary. It's hard to disentangle some of these issues, but some issues are very specific to the buy acquire. And one of those issues has to do with the existing provider in the practice. I imagine that, if you're looking at a practice to acquire, sometimes the provider, optometrist, doctor is looking to get out as soon as the ink is signed on the paper. Some are looking to kind of hang out for a while. Is there really an optimal situation? And maybe what are some of the considerations if someone wants to get out right away or if they want to hang around? I'm sure there's different dynamics and all that. Where does your mind go around that issue?
Absolutely. Hey, look, it starts with this, y'all, and it is transparency. If there is one thing that we have observed could help everyone, could help buyers, could help sellers, transparency. And most notably, transparency on account of the seller. So yes, I am speaking to the sellers out there. Be transparent, y'all. Yes, you've done amazing things and worked very hard, poured blood, sweat, and tears over decades into your business. But you have to realize that the future of that business and your exit is contingent on the ability to which a buyer really knows what they're getting into. So, and again, Mike, look, we have seen situations where lack of transparency on account of the seller has resulted in the terms of the sale being totally turned around. We have had instances where lack of transparency has killed a deal. It's no fun. It's no fun for anyone. It's no fun for a seller thinking that they're going to perhaps start to entertain the idea of retirement. And it's no fun for a buyer who's invested time and resources in what they're doing to perform due diligence and evaluate and move down this path of buying this business. So all of that to say, this whole topic of post-sale employment, it starts with transparency. Because I tell you, a lot of these concepts that we were touching on here also earlier in the conversation, things as simple as constructing that financial forecast and feasibility analysis. If a buyer can understand from the very beginning transparently what your intentions are in post-sale employment, that can factor itself right into the financial models, right? And as a matter of fact, there are even instances where a seller's receptiveness to post-sale employment can actually impact the sale price they get for this business. And I know we didn't do in this episode, we haven't touched a ton on all of the things that impact valuation, but all of these things are things that can impact the feasibility of the sale, the price of the sale, the terms of the sale. So that being said, when we do look at post-sale employment, it is also vitally important, A, that these things are being discussed from the very beginning. We don't want any sort of 11th hour surprises, okay? B, it's imperative also that the terms of that employment are going to be determined and agreed to during this phase of the process. Namely, when all the number crunching is being done, when all the analytics and forecasting is being done, that's when we need to be sure we're baking post-sale seller employment into our numbers. Now, obviously, there will be a whole world of then other compliance things, and look, Mike, and this is where it crosses that chasm into the HR world. And maybe I'll toss this out to you. And this is actually something that I've been meaning to have a one-on-one conversation with you about. So now we get to have it live, okay? But what about an instance when that seller now wants to be employed? What are some of the watch-outs from their employment agreement? Some of the HR kind of watch-outs, key things you really want to focus on if you're buying a practice and now you're going to employ that person who used to be in charge running the show. Now you're going to employ them in your business. What are some of these HR things you should be focusing on?
Well, I appreciate that question there. That's important, because when someone transitions from an owner to an employee, there's a tremendous mindset shift that needs to happen there, and where you have now employees who used to look at, Mr. Dr. Jones, let's say, as their owner of the practice, and now Dr. Smith is the owner, you've got potential confusion, right? So you got to create clarity with the former owner about what the roles and expectations are and get on the same page. I dare say you'd probably want to talk with that person well ahead of a close to make sure that they're going to be able to follow suit with your thought process, right? That, hey, you know what? If you have a question like that, Mr. Dr. Smith is the new owner, and you're not going to try to usurp, control or retain power. Making sure that you understand that you share the same values. You talk to Erich a lot about values when starting a practice. Well, are you getting into a relationship with a provider who has the same values as you? Or does this person maybe have some areas where they're very different and they led in a way that you don't agree with? And maybe they might continue to behave in a certain way that you don't agree with. That's something you would probably want to uncover in the due diligence process. So those are two things that I would definitely keep in mind. And I guess the last one would be, you got to do everything you can, seen this in other businesses, to make sure that after a deal closes, that you continue to have production at the level that's expected, and make sure you engineer your contract and the relationship and the resources so they continue to produce in the way that you had lined out in your business plan. And I'm sure, Erich, you've seen cases where things haven't really gone the way it was expected when a provider stays on, and that production goes down in a way that was not really anticipated. Is that the case? Yeah.
And that's never a good thing. But that's also, Mike, look, where it ties back to controllables and uncontrollables. If you're controlling all of those things you're capable of controlling, then you have minimized your risk in this relationship. But if you have, if you're tuning into shows like this to hear talking heads like me and Mike share ideas, but you never actually roll the sleeves up and commit to the controllables, again, that's where you're exposed. But it should be said that even with all the controllables being addressed, with good numbers pulled together, pulled into the financials, we know what the plan is. We have a good, well-written employment agreement with that seller who's now an employee. Things happen, things happen like that. And the degree to which we really do have those controllables well thought out. And I can't stress the importance of also tying all this stuff back to the practice's financials. I touched on a little bit earlier in our conversation here, talking about, like, in the online communities, when two doctors in two totally different, unrelated markets, almost opposite markets, are sharing ideas on what works. And it's like, well, wait up. I don't know how much I'd trust, because these are two radically different themarkets. But as it were, this is where it's really important for doctors to always bring it home to their business, their market, their financials, their practice financials, and building also on this theme of, in the context of transition and the post-sale employment, the transparency piece. Y'all, I can't express enough the importance of transparency. Look, at the same time that we've seen some of these employment interests throw some curveballs to us in these deals, I mean, we've also seen other instances where there are other things that can totally throw things off. You want to talk transparency? Asking a seller for financials, and the seller sends you a P&L that they prepared. Maybe they've even sent you 3 to 5 years of P&L that they prepared, but failed to ever provide a tax return that was submitted to the government. That's, Transparency, y'all. And by the way, to our sellers out there, if you are a prospective seller listening to this episode, if you are serious about doing this, get your affairs in order and be transparent in sharing this information with your prospective buyer. It's the only way this stuff is going to move forward. Also, another thing, I suppose, message to prospective sellers out there. Don't be afraid of pulling the Band-Aid off. What do I mean by that? Don't be afraid to uncover what the true value of your business is. Mike, I know private equity coming into healthcare, private equity coming into optometry and ophthalmology has disillusioned a lot of folks as to the expectations of what these businesses are truly worth. So this message to the sellers of rip the Band-Aid off. If you've been doing this all these years, 30 years, and 10 years ago, one of your classmates sold to private equity and you've learned what they sold to, and you've been putting in your time thinking you're going to get some pie in the sky figure, rip the Band-Aid off. The sooner you rip the Band-Aid off, the better. Because I'm here to tell you, you will not get that type of dollar on your practice. Perhaps a few outliers may, but go learn more about private equity, how they make purchases. When private equity penetrates industries, how they buy up industries, but then also when they move on from industries, I think you will see, if you do some of your own reading around this, I think you'll see that while there's still maybe private equity coming around eye care in the future, do not think you're going to get anything near what some of the first generation of PE acquisitions were getting. So, and I hope everyone trusts, look, y'all, this is coming from the heart because we're seeing this stuff unfold in real time. And what we hate to see is when practices are unable to sell because they waited too long. When practices are unable to sell because they were keeping too many secrets. We really need, now is the time we need to facilitate more of this. So to our sellers out there, you got these businesses, get in the game. There's a lot of emerging practice owners that want to get into ownership. If they're coming to Acrinos, then they're going to be exposed to concepts in cold start and in acquisition. We are experts in both. We do all this stuff. And it's not our side hustle either, Mike. Like, this is what we do full time. It's our thing, right? Yeah, transparency. I'm glad you tossed out that whole topic of transparency. It's very important and definitely necessary if we want to see these deals move forward.
One thing you mentioned a little bit earlier is something that I wanted to dive into, and that has to do with the idea of growth. And so if you're acquiring a business, as you said, you want to see it grow. The bank wants to see it grow. And I think you're a person who knows a little bit about helping an eye care business grow. So what are some things that a eye care business typically can do when they're maybe about to make an acquisition, or they made an acquisition, or maybe even if they haven't established one and they want to grow? Like, where's some of that low-hanging fruit that you typically see where there's opportunity to do that?
Yeah. Wow. 3 areas. First, dig into the data, the practice's data. We dig into operational data. We dig into financial data. So y'all, this is as simple as benchmarking the practice. So you've just purchased a practice, or maybe right now you're considering purchasing a practice and understanding the growth opportunity as part of your due diligence, right? So the first thing you want to do is analyze the business as is. So benchmark the practice across the relevant and most sought after performance metrics and your financial benchmarks. So performance metrics may be exam count, procedures, services performed, optical dispensary, specialty services delivered, where I'm going with this, y'all, is identify some of those key benchmarks and just simply see where the practice performs. So, for example, if we're looking at buying an optometry practice and the optical currently converts 40% of the RXs are then purchasing eyewear out of the optical, 40%, benchmark is closer to 50%. Awesome. That's an opportunity, right? We can say the same thing. You know, if you're an ophthalmologist looking at the business, wondering, hey, where's their opportunity? Pick your specialty, whatever you're looking to grow in that business. See where maybe the current business is deficient compared to benchmark, zero in there. Now, that's on the performance side where we would be pulling analytics out of the EHR or practice management. But also we look at the same types of approaches on the finance side. But here, we're not benchmarking the business to production performance benchmarks, but rather we're benchmarking it to expense. So, for instance, exploring purchasing an optometry practice, you look at the financials of this business as is, and their COGS, their cost of goods sold, is like 39%. Holy cow, there's huge opportunity. I mean, we could bring that from 39 down to like 25. Another one, this being more in your world, Mike, right? Looking at a practice and their HR costs are 35%. Oh, wow, that is like off the charts. Hey, there's opportunity to grow the profitability based on the purchasing decisions we're making. So when we're talking growth, right? There's two ways we can do it. We can do it by growing the top line revenue. We can also do it by reducing our expenses. Together, they're going to improve the bottom line. Some other areas of exploration. That market. Remember, the vast majority of these patients reside within a very tight radius of that market. How well do you know your market? Practices that work with Acrinos, they know their market inside and out across 9 zip codes surrounding their door. So really, hey, I'm thinking about adding dry eye specialty to my practice. Should I do it? I don't know. Let's look at your geospatial better market analysis. If the people in that community want it, we're going to do it. If they don't waste your time or money. Third key area to explore. Back into your world, Mike, and that's your people. Look, y'all, in the context of so much technology overtaking so many areas of vision and eye care, it's still a people-first business. Sure, telehealth is a thing, but most people still want to go and see their eye doctor in person. It's still a people-first business. So this is where I would invite you to look at the opportunity around this third area, and that is your people and your operations. Your job descriptions, org chart, workflows, who's doing what, why, and how. How are you developing your people? We know that lack of performance and development is a top reason why people leave, you know? So how are you developing them? So all of these things come together, Mike, to say that business you just bought that plateaued out here for that doctor these last few years, where are you going to go with it? We just touched on it. Right? It's right there.
Well, you know, we have covered so much ground here in the time that we've spent, Erich. I started our conversation with so little knowledge and insight. And I feel like I just had a street PhD here in starting up or acquiring an eye care business. But I have a very strong sense that there is so much more. And I know that there's so much more out there. I know you've invited folks to reach out to you at acrinos.com. I'll put the link into the show notes. But I just want to say thank you for your insight and your passion. I mean, you are lit up on this topic here. And I think if I'm a provider out there, I want to work with someone who's excited about the work. And so thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us, Erich.
Hey, Mike, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me on the show. We'll have to do this again sometime. And also, you'll have to come on over to an episode of Acrinos Access. We've got some really exciting things we want to explore in the world of HR. So we'll look forward to having you on the show.
Awesome. Well, Thank you so much, Eric. And thanks to you guys for listening. Whether you're watching live or you're listening to the YouTube version or the audio version, the point of Healthcare Leadership Live is to help you be a better leader, to help your clinic grow and succeed. And that's what I'm going to continue to do, have great people as guests here on the show. And so stay tuned, follow the show, follow me on LinkedIn, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts. And I promise I'm going to continue to bring great guests like the one we've had here today with Erich Mattei. So with that, thanks for listening. And I want to invite everybody now to go out there and lead with confidence.